Going for a walk means that you have time to go deeper into your own ideas. The more walkable your neighborhood, the more money you make, because it is very valuable to know lots of people. 71% of jobs that are given are never advertised.
Today I have with me Eugene Quinn, London-born, Vienna-based urbanist, DJ, journalist and entrepreneur, founder of a political culture group, Whoosh, to play with the city, build social capital and send out new political messages. Eugene has been the brains behind many inspiring projects like Whoosh, including, but not all of them, Vienna Walking Week, magdas social dinners, where refugees dine with locals, How to be Austrian, for OE1 Radio, Vienna and Munich Ugly Tours, and many, many more. His works featured in the New York Times, Guardian, Zeit, and on Russian TV. Eugene is passionate about public space and how to animate and celebrate it. Through watching Fellini films and teaching at Vienna Technical University, he developed the theory Street Capital. And this is how a measure of how much theatre and joy we find on some city streets, and on the opposite, how dull and cold some other streets are because they lack people and interactions with a sense of play. I welcome the smart, innovative and avant-garde Eugene Quinn. Welcome Eugene Quinn. Thank you for coming on the show. If you could start with telling us a little bit about yourself, please.
Eugene Quinn from London originally. My parents are Irish and I was born in East London. I grew up between London and Leeds. I'm 53 years old. And for the last 12 years, I've been living in Vienna, Austria. In German, you call me a bunter Hund, which means like a colorful dog, where you're not quite sure what breed it is. You're like, well, I'm flexible, let's say, adaptable. If you live between three different cultures or have experience of three different ways of living, then you can pick the best bits of each one. And I find it very productive being a migrant. I think it's people sometimes ask me how could I be more creative, and I just say leave your own country, because as soon as you're in a new place, not only are you forced to adapt, which keeps your brain alive, but also you become exotic. You're not normal anymore, you're not blending in, and there are plenty of opportunities in that, because once you're in a new place, you can see opportunities of things that you remember working really well at home that you just don't find in your new country. And then you think, yeah, maybe I could adapt that, remix it and try it out here.
Something I can relate to as well, being in another country. And most certainly, I like the way you said, the way you've put that. You do become more creative, and it's certainly opened up other avenues and doors for me, being here in India.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to over-romanticize it. There are plenty of problems with being a migrant, in terms of adapting to a new language and new expectations. And occasionally people, you get frustrated sometimes with the fact that things don't work. And at the same time, people, are sometimes surprised that you don't understand how things work, so it does take time. You make plenty of social mistakes at the beginning. So, when I first moved here, I moved to Vienna for love, to be with a woman. And, I was like a little child, really. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have the social apparatus and network, a job to open all of that up. It takes time to recognize, the system and how it functions.
Yeah. Pros and cons. There's always pros and cons. Cuisines, but I love the food here in India, but there's certain things I don't generally get here that I would get in the UK, or just in general in Europe, or so there are things that you miss. But I'm surprised though. When I first came, I thought I'd miss things way more than I did. It's every now and again you get a craving for something. Oh, I'd like that now, but you can't have it. That's one thing, isn't it?
I'm somebody who lives in the moment, and that's not, I didn't develop that. That's just how I'm born. And I think that's quite helpful to not be too sentimental, because if you're always, if you're one of those folks who finds themselves far from your friends and familiar things, then that's tough. If you're always thinking about them, about what could have been or what could be in the future. But
yep.
It annoys my mum that I'm somehow, not always thinking about home. But I'm quite fluid, really. I'm interested in that dialogue between different cultures and find it very productive. So it's not something that in practice has made me feel sentimental for Britain. There's plenty of things that I am a British person, and I've taken plenty of things out of the UK, but at the same time, in a digital age, you don't feel so far removed from things. You have access to to Guardian and to BBC and to some of the old comedy shows, and to access to people at home as well, friends. Through Facebook and other media, you can be connected. It's not, but at the same time, I really value going home. I haven't been home now for home to the UK. That is since COVID, since before COVID, and that's the longest time I've been outside of Britain. So I do recognise, that it will be even less familiar to me. I really feel when I'm in London a bit like a tourist now. Even though it's my hometown in many ways, I readjust to new transport systems and new buildings and almost whole new neighborhoods. So it's a bit strange when you imagine you come from a place and then you go there and it's not your place anymore, but at the same time, you don't quite fit in your new home either.
I feel like I have two homes now, really. I think I'll always have a place here in India. This is kind of a future, and back home in Norfolk, sunny Norfolk in the UK. So one of the key things that we're going to talk about, which is something you're obviously very passionate about, Eugene, is walking. And I'm just going to say it as simple as that for now, just to leave a little bit of to the imagination for anybody that is listening, because that is something that you're very passionate about. There's deeper reasons that you like to just walk, and we'll get onto those. Before we do, if you could just tell us a bit more about before you got to Vienna, because I think you were a producer, weren't you, in London?
My background is in journalism. Journalism, unfortunately, is dying now. People don't want to really pay for newspapers or even for TV connections. A lot of things which people used to pay for and were in the habit of buying every morning, that is now free. But also, I left behind my language zone. In Vienna, you speak a dialect of German. So I understood that if I left the UK, if I left my language zone, I'd be changing career. But yeah, in London, I did various jobs. I am quite an indisciplined person, really, but I worked as a conference producer and as a radio journalist, and I worked doing audio for business. So interviewing people for companies, ideas. I worked for Greenpeace for a year as well in the campaigning London office, which was very interesting, quite exciting. I worked for 4 years in the City of London for a law firm. So it's extremely unfocused. There's definitely no straight line running through my career. I saw opportunities at different moments, but at the same time, I don't have a degree. So, it wasn't as though I had a kind of solid structure to build on. I'm a bit more of a hustler than that. I mean, when I first left school, I was unemployed for a while. Used to test out different pharmaceutical products before they got to market. So I was a bit, after the rabbits and got it in the neck, or the monkeys, it will be injected into my arm. But I also picked the grapes in France and Italy, and I was on kibbutz for a while in Israel, working on a farm. And I did some construction work around Europe. So a kind of classic tale of wanting adventures. I read Jack Kerouac's book On the Road at a very impressionable age, a beautiful text about freedom and jazz, and it's in an American context, but I adapted it a little bit for Europe, and that was very exciting, just to want to live a life that would be full of adventures. Yeah. To have stories to tell when you would go home to the pub or just meet up with your mum, and it was a bit seat of the pants stuff. It wasn't always very easy, but it certainly builds your resilience, and also I think your ability to think fast, to be spontaneous, to react to opportunities, but also to make friends fast. To see opportunity if you're sitting on a train for 5 hours, to say, hey, there's people around me who might be interesting to. I was always a person who was curious. That's probably my driving force in both my career and my personal life. I like questions and answers, as we're doing now, and I like that exchange of truly listening to people and finding common ground, but also developing your thinking, in reaction to interesting new new perspectives. You know, the world is changing so fast right now across the last 30 years with the digital revolution, with social media, but also with, you know, the world opening up in many ways. Knowledge has become much more fluid, Wi-Fi and all of that stuff. So, you know, I definitely am somebody who would like to stay on top of things, even if I'm not a digital native, you know, to see opportunities. And I am naturally quite an optimistic person, and that helps a great deal, you know, that people respond much better to those who are open and friendly and you know, enjoy a good conversation than those who are a bit more cynical or bitter, or, you know, somehow a bit more wanting to make money from you the whole time. So, you know, it's a kind of slightly dreamy way of living, but also I think pretty good basis for later career potential. You know, it's not a classic university structure, you know, at the beginning of your professional life, but it is another kind of problem solving and presentation of yourself, you know, recognizing the ways in which that's a great advantage. I wish schools taught young people how to stand up in front of each other and persuade each other, but also to entertain people, you know, to have stories to tell about your own experience which resonate with others. And journalism, I must say, was very productive for that, because even if I'm not a journalist anymore, I'm taking a lot of those skills. So what journalists, storytellers, they look for innovation. They're always looking for new ideas, new perspectives. They're good at listening. They do research, proper research, fact-based research. Obviously, it's a big theme in healthcare, but also in COVID time, that there's so much nonsense being talked out there. You know, and I like robust, evidence-based facts. I like it where things make sense, rather than people saying, well, you know, watch out for that or be careful about that. You know, you can find out medically and scientifically what works and what doesn't.
It sounds, I think if anyone's listening, I think they'd be quite excited about what you've just said in terms of, you know, your younger days and the journey you've gone on. I thought it sounded exciting. It's up for debate, isn't it? And I think each to their own. And but I think it helps massively if you have variety at your early stages of living. You know, growing up, I didn't have a university degree, and I was similar. I kind of took opportunities as they came, and I haven't as diverse as yours, not as diverse, but it certainly was diverse. You know, I had all sorts of jobs, um, and it took me a long time before I really kind of found something that I was happy to stay in. But even then, I decided to move to the company I work for now. It helps with your character. It helps with being more open as a person. I completely
quite undisciplined in many ways, and even now, you know, I mean, I'm happy to hear that, you know, you've found something you feel, you know, settled and focused on. But I'm very lucky to work for quite a loose platform, you know, the collective that I work for in Vienna, which means that people are open for possibilities. So it's not as though, you know, I create maybe 4 or 5 new projects each year, but I don't know what I'll be doing next year. And I like that there is this looseness about reacting to what's in the news, but also to people I meet and to, you know, trends that come around, which mean that our work is always relevant, but also somehow playing in a creative way with solutions to contemporary problems.
My career is one thing, but I have many little pieces on the side which keeps me occupied and gives me that diversity that I do crave. Um, so let's talk about your well. I keep saying let's talk about this and then go back to another thing. Space and places. This is something that you founded. Do you want to tell us about that, and then we'll get into, I suppose, a little bit about your TED talk and the walking piece.
Yeah. So 8 years ago, I was thinking about what I could do in Vienna. I worked for a while as a tour guide for Great Rail Journeys, which is a British company which organizes train trips all over the world, starting from London St Pancras, going under the sea to France or Belgium, and then onwards. You know, so I made adventures with British people, British travel groups, to Sweden, to Vladivostok on the Pacific Ocean, through Moscow on the Trans-Siberian, but also to Morocco, to Rome, to Austria, down to Bosnia. And I was doing that between London and Vienna, but I don't fly, so I move quite slowly across the continent, which is one feature of my life, that I'm an ecologist. But 8 years ago, a couple approached me and my wife and said, we have an idea for a community group which would build community, but also say some new things about what Vienna means and how life is here in our city right now. Vienna is a city which all around the world has a particular profile as being a kind of waltzing chocolate cake city, a rather kitsch, retro, maybe slightly dusty museum, very elegant, very stylish, but not very, very cool or fresh. And in fact, it is an absolutely dynamic city. It's growing very fast. It's one of the 4 United Nations cities in the world. And it's a neutral country. It spends almost nothing on the military, but it is a place which, obviously after the terror of the Second World War, decided to just do away with its military and focus on culture and art instead. And so it is a meeting place. It's a crossroads city, which, going back to its Roman days, it was often a place where different groups would meet up. And it's a student city now. It's got the highest quality of life in the world. But these are not stories that most people are familiar with. The inclusivity, the social housing. It's a city which has a big heart and which looks after its citizens in a holistic way. It thinks about the weakest people in society and supports them. Education is free. Childcare is free. University places are free. The public transport costs €1 per day in Vienna for a world-class service, and there's no barrier to get on. You just walk straight onto the underground or the trams or the buses and the trains. But at the same time, it's a city which works. Where the infrastructure works, and also where companies feel welcome. It's somehow in the middle of Europe. There is this idea of a golden hour in Europe, which is a time where America is awake and also India is awake. So you can have conferences, but also presentations and academic meetings in Central Europe, where, and that's not the case if you have an event in Los Angeles. It's very tricky to broadcast that to the rest of the world, as we see with the Oscars and various other things. We wanted to get the Viennese to recognize, to play with each other. We wanted to build new networks and new dialogue inside the city. So it's not, even if it's a cultural project, it's absolutely focused on local people. It's not a tourist project. And one of the elements I developed was walking. That is to say, recognizing the value of walking. So Space and Place is an 8-year-old non-profit group. However, last October, I created a new group. So Space and Place is something which I've left behind now. I'm very proud of it. It still exists. It's mostly in German. So unless your listeners, viewers, group,
I did go on the website, and it does translate into English if you go onto the website, which is obviously handy.
It's quite a challenge to translate German into English. It's not. I'm sure you're familiar with some movies and things, but it's a language where the verb comes last. In a sentence. And so that sounds very odd to English speakers, because you're waiting to know what the person wants to say. It's not, it's a language which plays with you and makes you wait. So it doesn't always sound so smooth or clean to take. I mean, that's true of most languages. It's difficult to translate them automatically, but I make many tours in German now. I have an 8-year-old son, Joseph, and he has started to correct my German now, which is
Brilliant.
great fun, but slightly humiliating also, that he corrects me. He likes the power and influence over me. Space and Place is a group which I think it's an interesting format, which could be adapted for many other cities around the world. I think that there is a hole there in many cities of a group which is we're definitely about progressive politics, about inclusion, about feminism and Europe and ecology and pro-gay. We are for dialogue and and curiosity. But at the same time, we are working with all kinds of different minority groups in Vienna. I'm a DJ also, and I've developed a project recently called Music Safari, where I go into a school and ask the children. So something like 36% of Viennese adults were not born in Austria. This is it's not quite like London in terms of being a world city, but it's definitely quite diverse, and it's a successful city. So you need lots of people to come in and do the jobs. I go into schools and speak to the children, 8, 9-year-olds, and ask them, which music do you listen to at home that you never hear on the streets of Vienna? So what music do you hear at weddings and house parties, which is from your culture? So typically the migrants here come from Ukraine, Russia, Poland, Serbia, Croatia, Turkey, Bosnia, in the refugees out of Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Nigeria, China. So it's, it tends to be not many people, not so many from Western Europe, but they're mostly economic migrants or refugees. And that's their background. Now they are young Viennese. And so I collect songs from them. And they're quite excited that this kind of honky Englishman comes into their class and asks them, let's play some music that comes from your Roma, tradition, your kind of gypsy, Sinti community. And we play it quite loud in the classroom. And then I say to them, but on Saturday, I'm going to play it in that square over there, not on a school square, but just wherever they hang out on a Saturday. I set up a little party on a Saturday afternoon. So it's in the daytime, so it's inclusive. And the kids come along and dance to their music. They show us how the steps, not in a coordinated way, but if you play loud music, kids will say, hey, he's playing our song now. This is a song that we all know and can sing the words to. And the other children are fascinated, to see these dance steps, because for some reason, often you don't share, your own music in your own language with school friends from another culture. And, it is a British tradition, I must say, that all of the migrant cultures feed into the pop music of Britain. The Beatles come from Liverpool because that's a port city where lots of Black Americans were bringing jazz and bebop and all kinds of different sounds into Liverpool. But you can hear, music that comes from Birmingham. So I would like that to be the case more in Vienna, and I invite people to come and dance to their steps and to mix it all up together, to show that music belongs in public space and is good to listen to, but also wherever children go, their parents follow, and the parents are also quite surprised to hear their music being played. By somebody who's not from their culture, and they come and they either ask for a song saying, hey, don't play that song, play this song instead, or they dance, or they just simply start to speak to the other parents from other cultures. And so that's, a low budget way of creating intercultural dialogue, make the city more interesting ultimately, to recognize different languages and different dress styles and different food and language, culture, identity, religion.
How do you come up with these projects?
In the case of the walks that I do, I walk. I mean, that is how I get around the city. I live quite centrally. I'm one of those lucky people where something I've always enjoyed doing became my job. That's also true for music, for being a DJ. But yeah, I've always been a walker, been interested in connecting the dots of my city, whether that's London or Leeds or Berlin, where I lived for a while, or Vienna. I do recommend walking. I think it's a lot of people post-COVID are thinking about how they could change their lifestyle, to live in a more ecological, but also in a more community-based way, looking to take some things away from the trauma of the last 15, 16, 17 months. And I think one of the most beautiful things you can do is simply to walk. And not a lot of people, when they think about organizing a walk with friends, if they're the weekend, if they say, let's go for a walk, they think instinctively about going for a walk in nature, in a forest or the hills or along a river or a lake or a park. But actually, I think that there's something to be said for walking through your own neighborhood, because if you go to walk in a forest, you're probably not going to meet anybody you know. If you go walking around your own neighborhood, you will meet people you know. Jane Jacobs, one of my heroines, she's an American campaigner. She's dead now. but she wrote a book about good community life at the micro scale. And she describes how valuable it is economically to walk around your own neighborhood, because you meet people who you know, and then friends of them who you don't know. And there is a good chance that you would meet those people again if they live near to you. Maybe you would say, let's go for coffee, or you'd exchange, a funny little short exchange, little chat, and that builds on the friendships that you already have and builds the level of trust which exists in your neighborhood. Of course, it's a question of how walkable your neighborhood is, but if you live in a big city, chances are there's plenty of people walking around, and the more people you know, the more walkable your neighborhood, the more money you make, because it is very valuable to know lots of people. And if you go to a forest, you probably won't meet anybody you know. So I would like people to think about that 71% of jobs that are given are never advertised. There is a certain kind of job that is put out in the newspapers or online, but there's plenty more that are given to friends of friends of friends. So the more people you know, the more likely you are to get a job, but also just to fall in love. The more people you know, the more people you know, and it makes sense to spread your net wide and not just to rely on Tinder, because there is a level of trust if it's a friend of a friend. You know that you don't want to embarrass your friends, so you're going to meet this person again, so you might as well be good to them. But also Jane Jacobs, so she was a campaigner against, if you think about Los Angeles and New York City, she lived in New York, in Brooklyn, and she campaigned against turning New York into Los Angeles, which means building big freeways through the middle of the city, knocking down lots of old neighborhoods to make the city more car friendly. And she said, no. What we need, you'd be destroying lots of communities, creating lots of noise and pollution, and dividing people, because big highways stop people meeting each other across the other side. So she saved New York basically from becoming Los Angeles, from becoming car focused. And she fought against the traffic controller of New York City as a private citizen. It's a very romantic story. You can look it up on YouTube. There's lots of documentaries about it. But she also wrote a book about why it is that we should take time to walk around our own neighborhood, because it builds identity and belonging and curiosity for the architecture and wondering who lives there, and also you support the local economy because you pop into shops and cafes, and you simply become part of the fabric of your neighborhood. Whereas if you drive out of your basement garage in a big car to your office, you don't build any kind of trust or stories for the day, and you don't meet anybody while you're driving through the city, more or less. You might see somebody and doot your horn. That's not going to get you very far in terms of your mental health or theirs, or building community. So she starts with, at the community level, with the fact that walking is about safety for women and children on the streets. The more people are on the streets, the safer they are. You don't want to walk along a street on your own with maybe one person who you can't quite see on the other side. If you've got hundreds of people, then those are instinctively neighborhoods we quite enjoy. I don't know how it is in an Indian context, if you have footpaths, and how comfortable it is to be out in the streets. But certainly in Vienna, it's a city of four seasons for sure. It's a bit too cold in winter to really be comfy to hang out in the streets, and we do get very hot days in the summer, but there's plenty of lovely days in between, in the evenings and in the mornings. And I encourage people to walk to work, to walk to the cinema, to walk to meetings. But also, if you walk out of a meeting, on your way to the next meeting, you can reflect on what you just heard and how you respond to it. Rather than immediately checking your emails, you just think, it's interesting what she said in that meeting. I wonder how I could, creatively build on that. And it's very flattering, of course, if you take time to really listen to what people are saying in meetings and what you think they would like to hear, how you could develop their project in a practical way with your skills. So I walked around the city when I was first here, when I was unemployed, and thought about my responses to the city, what I found shocking and surprising, but also beautiful. And this is a 2,000-year-old city, so there's plenty to look at. But not focusing on the traditional imperial pomp and ceremony of the center, but looking actually out towards the neighborhoods where people live and what makes each neighborhood distinctive, what makes it click, and why you know that you're in this district and not that district. So I also was interested in a little bit in discovering the soul of contemporary Vienna, and in some ways holding up a mirror back to the city and saying, this is who we are, this is how we live, this is the difference between this neighborhood and that neighborhood. And it's something which a lot of people don't do. And one of the funny things is that when you go on holiday, people save up a lot of money and spend a lot to go on holiday, and they're very excited. It's the highlight of the year for many of them. And what do you do when you get to Paris or Athens or New York or London? You walk around all day. That's what tourists do. And you enjoy it very much. You sleep well at night, and you get up the next day and go and walk in another neighborhood. And I wonder why it is that people don't, enjoy so much being a tourist and a traveler and exploring a new city, but they often are completely unfamiliar with districts of their own because they don't pick up a guidebook and say, hey, why don't we go and explore that neighborhood that's developing fast, that everybody talks about and we've never been to. So I hope that people can discover the same desire and curiosity in their hometown as they do in others, because, sorry to say it, but travel is not sustainable, ecologically. If everybody in every country wants to travel in the decadent way that we in the West used to, then we have no future at all. The earth will get extremely hot. So I think we need to find ways in which we can be travelers on a more limited scale and discover the exotic in our hometown. I did some research about why it is that people travel, and the motivation is partly to come home refreshed, to see some new things, to try out new food, new architecture, to hear new music, to not do the boring things that you do at home, in terms of washing up or cleaning or, commuting. To take some cool photos for Instagram, to post for your friends, to do some sport, and just to live a little bit differently. And it turns out you can do all of those things in your hometown if you do a bit of research. There are other languages being spoken, there's other food available, there's sport, there's beautiful things you've never seen before. And you can get away from the banal routine of getting up at whatever time you get up and doing your usual things, So we created something called Vienna Walking Week, which was a holiday for the Viennese in Vienna. It's a response to COVID because we couldn't travel, most people, last summer, but at the same time it was showing that you don't really need to, because there is so much interesting stuff on your doorstep if you one time just open your mind to the possibilities.
Yeah, well, look, I think there was a lot said there. There was some bits that I'd like to pick up on. I do like to go for walks, and I've been going for the last few weeks. I go for an hour every morning, especially we're in lockdown here in India. So for me, it's nice just to get out and get some sunlight and some fresh air. I don't really go into the rural, not rural, but where there's any build-up of any kind of people around. But that is more to do with where I'm located. But also, I do like a little bit of the peace and quiet, personally. But when I go to a city, a city that's nice to go and walk around, I'm not really inside the city. I'm kind of on the outskirts. I do enjoy going, walking around a city. And you're absolutely right with what you just said, it's quite refreshing to hear, actually, about when we go on holidays. We go to city breaks. All we do is walk around. I'm always knackered. But do we do it enough in our own towns and our own cities? Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. A lot of people don't.
If you see a big group of people walking together in a city, you assume that it's a tourist tour or a demonstration. But that's a shame, because if I organize walking tours in Vienna, and 90% of the people who come on the tour are from Vienna. And it's much more productive, I would say, as an experience if you walk around your hometown with people from there. Because, if I walk around Vienna with a group from South Korea or Texas, I'm not going to learn very much about Vienna. Whereas if I walk around with quite an engaged group of citizens, of journalists and architects and academics and pensioners and students and migrants, school kids, so I'm going to learn a lot about Vienna because people have much more experience of the city. They might know somebody who lives in a house or who knows the owner, and that means that each of my tours is more interesting than the one before because I'm building on the stories that I hear. So I hear a good story, and that becomes part of the tour. And basically, our tours are debates in public space. It costs nothing to organize a tour. You need to do a bit of research, but logistically, anybody can do it. What I do is come up with a kind of funky title and then try to see if I can answer a question, which a lot of people are talking about in Vienna right now. So, for example, I make a tour this Friday. We've been in lockdown for a long time. So just last Wednesday, Vienna opened up, which means that we're allowed to make public tours again. And I'm making a tour called Smells Like Wien Spirit, which for those listeners under 30 might not recognize that that's a Nirvana song. Smells Like Teen Spirit from the early 90s. And Wien is the name of the city of Vienna in German. So what we're looking for is the soul of Vienna through how it smells. And for some reason, people are uncomfortable. If you say you're going to make a city tour about how the city smells, people imagine that you're going to smell bad things. People imagine that cities don't smell good, but it's not true. Cities used to smell really bad, but they don't anymore. Cars are much cleaner than they used to be. And we got refrigerators, people have got deodorant, but also people are wearing a lot less perfume than they did 30 years ago. Men have almost stopped wearing perfume in Vienna and Austria.
Less perfume now.
Less perfume, that's right.
Really?
That's right. I'm not saying they're wearing less deodorant, but they're not wearing deodorant which fills up a whole lift with a stink. It's more private and subtle. Any perfumes that they're wearing, which is progress, I think. But through the smell of the city, you can discuss all kinds of contemporary issues because climate change changes the smell of a city. Because in a city like Vienna, which has 4 seasons, it's hotter and therefore more windows are open, and therefore you're aware of what people are doing inside their home. But also tourists tend to eat outside much more than the locals do. They take almost every meal outside. And they've pushed the Viennese actually into eating more on terraces and in front of restaurants. What used to be inside is now often outside. But also you have big football viewings, where the smell is of burgers and beer and sweat. People collect. It used to be that you'd go to a bar maybe or watch footy at home, but now they watch it in big groups, which is quite good fun. And concerts are increasingly outdoors because of climate change. But also factories. It's really interesting to walk past some key factories where some of the food produce, whether it's roasting coffee or one of the signature chocolates from the city is called Mannerschnitte. It's like a biscuit that you buy and you go home with this kind of tourist kitsch biscuit called a Mannerschnitte. And we walk past that factory, which smells of hazelnuts and biscuits and chocolate. It's a good smell, chocolate factory. And we go to a brewery, but we also go to a couple of street markets. And in central Vienna, you have horse-drawn carts. So you can still smell horse urine, horse shit in the middle of the city. And we go on public transport. There's one line here called the U6, the U6 of Deutsch. And that's supposed to be the migrant line, the one where the kind of slightly wilder Balkan migrants ride up and down Vienna. And it's sort of known as the party mile. It can sometimes be a bit of a freak show. And there's supposed to be a perfume called Chanel number U6, which is a wild mix of vodka urine, underarm, armpit sweat, vodka urine. So it means like you've been drinking urine all day and then you urinate on the underground. Yeah. And then armpit sweat, and then kebabs and marijuana. So it's quite a heady mix. And we go looking for this smell. We've never found it, but we wanted to play a bit with to not just show the pretty smells of the city, but to show how migration maybe has changed the city a little bit. You get these shisha bars now, where people are smoking this kind of strawberry water or peach water, whatever it is.
Yeah.
These quite kind of slight. It's not my favorite smell, but it's interesting when you come across it. And for sure you smell more marijuana than you used to. It's still technically illegal here, but plenty of youngsters walk around smoking. You smell less cigarettes. It's kind of going out of fashion. You're not allowed to smoke in the way that you used to here. But there's lots of food produced in Vienna, so it's interesting to reflect. That is to say, it's grown. There are farms in the city, and I suppose people might know about schnitzel, as a dish, which smells great, fried in butter. As you're walking past, there are different versions of schnitzel now with cheese or vegetarian things, but also the classic one is made of baby calf. And the first stop on the tour is a motorway, which doesn't have a very strong smell because cars are cleaner than they used to be. They are 17 times cleaner than they were in the early 70s. There's much less smell of cars now. And big trucks and buses the buses are electric and the trucks are banned from the middle of the city. And then we go to a sausage stand, traditional kind of pork sausage kiosk, and we talk about the smells of late night Vienna. And then we go to a Turkish bakery, and I ask the group if this bakery smells of Vienna or not, and they're a bit skeptical, but they say, yeah, I think it probably does. But it takes time for a migrant smell to come to belong. But coffee is also a Turkish import, and for sure everybody thinks that coffee as a smell belongs in Vienna because of the traditional coffee houses. So we look at what just as curry is a smell that belongs to the UK now, to London and Birmingham and Manchester. There's curry miles in all these cities, and it's not the same curry as you get in India. It's been adapted for a British palate and for the British weather, and it's interesting to reflect on that cross-cultural dialogue and what is authentic food.
I think I'm just trying to while you're saying all of this, I'm just trying to relate it back to anyone that's listening of what they could go and do in their, whether they're in India or wherever they're listening, in the US, France. You can go and do this, can't you? Whether there's someone there to guide you or ask you those questions that you're asking the people that you go on with these tours. I do think it's an interesting thing to go and do and explore. Before we wrap up today, is just touch on some of the stuff that when you go for walks, the inspiration you get and how it helps you be more creative. Because I think that's the one thing, I've said this on a couple of other podcasts and people I've spoke to, is there's two places where I might have even said this to you before when we spoke previously. There's two places that I generally get inspiration for and ideas from, and I know a lot of people like meditation. I personally, I don't like to just sit down and sit in peace and quiet. I'd rather be moving, but I like to go for a walk to get inspiration. And for me, that's kind of almost like my meditation. I think we all have to do the same thing to get the same results sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's two places. Is walking, wherever that is. Where I'm walking, I not generally get a lot of ideas and inspiration. There's a whiteboard. You can't see it, but that's where I have lit. When I come back from a walk, if there's something, because I'll maybe have 2 or 3 ideas, I'll quickly write them down. And even if I don't do anything with them right then, I know I'll come back to them. And the other place is the shower. That's my other little funny spot.
Yeah, and the thing that combines those two is that you are offline. I think generally, if you walk properly, I don't think it's a good idea to walk while reading or watching a film, So being in a shower and going for a walk means that you have time to go deeper into your own ideas. And that's a central point, really, which a lot of people don't recognize, because I think many people, if they want to develop an idea, they go online and Google a word. That can work for some people, but actually a lot more oxygen flows into your lungs and a lot more blood to your brain when you're walking than when you're sitting in front of a computer, as we are now. So I absolutely recommend getting out there. And I made a TED talk about this, about the idea that quite a few great thinkers, and the TED talk was a walk. We were allowed to break the rules of a formal TED talk where you're supposed to stand on a red circle. So I walked through West Vienna. You can find it on YouTube. And reminded people of the fact that Beethoven, who from the age of 20 lived in Vienna, he used to walk for 5 hours per day through West Vienna. And it was absolutely a part of his composition. And you can hear it in his music if you ever listen to a piece. There is a rhythm to it, and energy and dynamism that's missing from some more melancholy styles of classical music. And he walked around with musical notes. It was clearly a part of his art, part of his creative development to go for a walk for 5 hours each day. But also Aristotle in ancient Athens, he took his students for a walk as a lecture. And there were two reasons for that. One, because he wanted it to be connected to the city. He didn't want philosophy to be so abstract that it didn't make sense. But also because he wanted them to be visible in the city, to be a part of the wider experience, and to get some ideas in their head from moving instead of sitting still. Plenty of teachers also use that. If you're at a conference, people will ask you to stand up and jump and shake around a bit, because they know that it isn't good for us to sit all day, but we do. But also Charles Dickens used to go for a walk at nighttime. He was an insomniac like me, and so he would. And being in bed is another great place to develop ideas, by the way, if you're not tired. I think about a lot of things while I'm laying in bed at night. But yeah, Dickens would go for a walk at night because he overheard fascinating dialogue of the nighttime characters. Not all of them, working legitimately. Lots of criminals were out, and people who didn't necessarily want to be heard. But he would listen to them, in the taverns and on the streets. And you can hear that in his dialogue, wonderful dialogue in Dickens' books. He was also a social campaigner, for the rights of poor people, for better healthcare and for women and lots of other things. And then Steve Jobs, it's very interesting, and I think it should be better known that he recognized, so the boss of Apple, late Steve Jobs, took people for a walk through Silicon Valley for a job interview. He recognized how artificial it is to come and sit in a big corporate office. It's quite intimidating. And it was just one-on-one, him and the potential candidate, someone who he thought might work well or not. And he wanted to see how the other person walked through the city, what speed they went at, whether they stopped at traffic lights, how often they looked at him, how they reacted to interesting situations on the street. So he was, he wanted a fairer way to judge a candidate, but also, of course, there's lots of psychological, there's different ways to walk through the city. But the crucial thing is that compared to cycling, for example, or driving, it's much easier to write an idea down if you're walking through the city, if you develop something interesting, and then to build on that, because if you are cycling and you're trying to remember an idea, you might not necessarily develop the next idea because you're stressed that you're going to forget the first one. So I think it's very productive to walk with a piece of paper. And it's not that I set out thinking, I hope I'm going to have a great idea today. It's simply that my natural response to noticing the ways in which the city is developing mean that I am always thinking about things, not necessarily walking things, but reactions to people, to places, to smells, to music, to ideas, and problem solving, which is a key part of modern working life. Figuring out when you've got a challenge, how to figure it out. In my case, sometimes it's thinking of a sentence that I want to make smoother, that sounds better. Going for a walk really helps a great deal with that. And it's free. It's very, very easy thing to do in your life. All you need to do is put on your shoes right now and walk out your front door. That's it. It's not very challenging. You don't need to invest in lots of technology. And I do recommend getting lost sometimes in the city. Some people are continually looking at the phone to know if they've got to turn left or right. Forget about it. Just walk off in a new direction, tomorrow morning, tomorrow evening, with friends or on your own. You will find that it's very good for your mental health, because it gives you time and space to reflect on things, but also to look forward to things. One of the most beautiful things about going on holiday is looking forward to going on holiday. And if you are so stressed by answering all the emails and doing all of the administration before you go away, that you have no time to get excited about, the restaurants you're going to go to, or the clubs, or the people you're going to meet, or the course you're going to do, you miss out on a beautiful part of an adventure like that. So walking allows you to get excited about a party you're going to, or a film you're going to go see, or whatever it is. Often we're so rushed getting from one event to another that we forget to think about what it means to have that opportunity. Whether that's reading a book, or going to a piece of theatre, or meeting friends for dinner. It's a beautiful thing to look forward to it, and afterwards to think, yeah, that was a good meal. Enjoyed that, and you remember some stories that you heard and think about telling other people those stories. So walking is a creative format. It seems slow. So a lot of people don't want to walk because it seems inefficient. And for sure, it is the slowest form of mobility. But if you understand walking as working, which I do, then it becomes the most efficient way to get through the city, because you're going to arrive with much better ideas than the person who's been playing computer games, on the underground on the way there, or driving, getting stressed with other people. If you arrive fresh and full of, stories to tell about what happened to you on the way to work, on the way to your meeting, then I think that you're going to arrive, in a much better condition. But also remember that you're building trust, building community. Walking around your neighborhood has a productive benefit, not just for you, but for all those people around you, because you are eyes on the street, which provide security, but you're also supporting your local economy and perhaps making some potential friends. Some people are a bit clumsy with new people. A lot of people walk around with music in their ears, so they never will meet anybody on the streets. That's quite closed, and I think a mistake. Maybe if you listen to a podcast, that could be productive, or prepare for a meeting, with a quick telephone call. But I would recommend just listening to the city soundscape, the soundtrack of your hometown, recognizing which songs are the big songs this summer, or thinking about the smell of a restaurant, thinking, I've got to check that place out, or noticing that a new cafe is open and thinking, yeah, I'd like to go there this evening.
I kind of want to leave it at this, because I think it's such a nice way to end. Anyone that's listening, I think the way you've just said that and described with such passion as well, would leave. I would like to think anybody that's listening to want to get out and go for a walk and just take that step, because I think it's a bit underrated now. Walking is underrated. There is a lot of transport. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't have a use motor vehicles. I do. But I have most certainly the last few months made way more of an effort to kind of get out and walk more, for many reasons, and for the health reasons. Also, I do enjoy it in general. It just, I suppose, yeah. I don't really. Thank you, Eugene. I'll make sure we put all of the links in the descriptions, whether it's on YouTube or on the podcast platforms. I've been thoroughly enjoyed listening to you today and the conversation, and it kind of gets me fired up even more about just kind of getting out a bit more as well. I've like I said, the last few months I've made a consistent effort to get out first thing in the morning. First thing I do is have a coffee, and then I go for my walk. And I always come back. I take about an hour, and I just always come back feeling much better, and ready for the day. So.
Exactly. I mean, it helps you to connect with the day and think about how each day is different. Not just in terms of the weather, but how your neighborhood is developing. Things opening and closing, new characters on the streets. It's always really interesting to have a story to tell. Yeah. So please stay in touch, and thank you very much for your questions, Richard. I think you're doing great work. It's very interesting, your approach. Your openness to different ways in which people can can develop personally, and it's an interesting challenge for me to speak to someone in a completely different context. Walking in India is such a different prospect because it's forced on many people. They don't necessarily make a choice about walking. They maybe would like to faster mobility and safer mobility. I'm sure walking is quite dangerous for many people, but at the same time, it is useful for me to click out of my European sensibility and recognize that walking means very different things depending on the weather and the quality of the roads and the respect of other users and the safety situation. But good luck with the rest of your podcast. It's charming to speak to you, and thanks for reaching out.
If you'd like to reach out to Eugene, then we have left the links in the description. This has been Richard Roser and Eugene Quinn. Peace out.